Have you ever wondered what goes through the mind of a criminal moments before they commit a felony? We often imagine a mastermind plotting every detail with precision and care. We think of Hollywood movies, where the thief has a complex plan involving blueprints and stopwatches. However, reality is frequently far more absurd and less glamorous than fiction. There are moments in the history of crime where the perpetrator seems to have left their common sense at the door. One such case stands out not for the brilliance of the heist, but for the sheer incompetence of the execution. This is the story of a man who made the job of the police easier than they could have ever dreamed. The city of Chicago, Illinois, is known for its stunning architecture and bustling streets, but it also has its share of crime and desperation. In the year 2008, the economy was taking a downturn, and many people were feeling the pressure of financial instability. Among them was a man named Thomas Infante. Thomas was not a career criminal or a hardened gangster. He was an average citizen, facing the same struggles as many others in his community. The weight of debt and the fear of losing what little he had drove him to a point of irrational decision-making. It is in this climate of desperation that our story takes a turn from the mundane to the unbelievable. On a seemingly ordinary afternoon in October, Thomas Infante decided that he had found a solution to his money problems. He would rob a bank. The target he chose was a Fifth Third Bank branch located on the north side of Chicago. He did not have a crew or a getaway driver waiting in a running car. He did not have a mask to hide his face or gloves to cover his fingerprints. He simply had a hooded sweatshirt and a plan that was formed in the haze of anxiety. As he approached the bank, the bustling city life continued around him, unaware that a crime was about to unfold in the most ridiculous manner possible. Thomas walked into the bank with his hood pulled up, attempting to look inconspicuous. The bank was quiet, with only a few customers conducting their daily business. The security cameras silently recorded his entry, capturing his face and his attire clearly. He stood in line, waiting for a teller to become available. His heart must have been racing as he rehearsed what he would do next. In his pocket, he clutched a note that he had prepared beforehand. This note was the linchpin of his plan, the tool he would use to demand money without drawing the attention of the armed security guard standing near the entrance. When it was finally his turn, Thomas approached the counter where a female teller was waiting. He tried to keep his head down, but the bright lights of the bank illuminated his features. He did not pull out a weapon or shout commands. Instead, he slid the note across the marble counter toward the teller. The note was simple and direct, demanding that she hand over the cash in her drawer or face consequences. The teller, trained to handle such situations with calm compliance, read the note. She did not scream or panic. She simply opened her drawer and began to gather the bills to hand over to the robber. The interaction lasted less than a minute. To an outside observer, it might have looked like a normal transaction. Thomas took the money, which amounted to roughly $400, and stuffed it into his pockets. He then turned and walked out of the bank as quickly as he could without running. He had done it. He had robbed a bank and walked away with the cash. As he stepped back onto the Chicago streets, he likely felt a surge of adrenaline and relief. He believed he had gotten away with the crime and that his financial woes were temporarily alleviated. However, Thomas had made a critical error in his haste and lack of preparation. In his rush to leave the scene, he left the demand note behind on the counter. This is not uncommon in bank robberies, as criminals often want to flee as fast as possible. But this specific note was different. It was not written on a scrap of paper or a napkin found in a trash can. The piece of paper Thomas used to threaten the bank teller was actually the bottom half of a document he had in his possession. It was a document that would serve as the ultimate breadcrumb trail for the authorities. The police arrived at the Fifth Third Bank shortly after Thomas fled. The teller had triggered the silent alarm once he was out of sight. Detectives from the Chicago Police Department and agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation secured the scene. They began interviewing witnesses and reviewing the security footage. The teller provided a description of the suspect, a white male in his late 30s wearing a dark hoodie. But the most important piece of evidence was sitting right there on the counter. The detective picked up the demand note using gloves to preserve any potential fingerprints. As the investigators examined the note, they noticed something peculiar on the reverse side. The front of the paper contained the threatening message scrawled in ink. But when they turned the paper over, they realized exactly what it was. It was the bottom portion of a pay stub. And not just any pay stub. It was a pay stub belonging to the robber himself. Printed clearly on the back of the demand note was the full name of the suspect, Thomas Infante, along with his home address. The detectives could hardly believe their eyes. It is rare in the world of criminal investigation that a suspect hands over their identification at the scene of the crime. Usually detectives have to rely on partial fingerprints or grainy video footage to identify a perpetrator. They have to chase down leads and interview associates. In this case, Thomas Infante had essentially introduced himself to the police. The pay stub even included the name of his employer and the dates of his recent pay period. The investigation, which could have taken weeks or months, was effectively solved in a matter of seconds. The police quickly ran a background check on Thomas Infante to confirm the information on the pay stub. The address listed was a residence not far from the bank itself. It appeared that Thomas had robbed a bank in his own neighborhood, using a note written on his own payroll document. The level of negligence was astounding. The officers assembled a team to proceed to the address listed on the note. They did not need to launch a manhunt or put out a public bulletin. They simply needed to drive to his house. Meanwhile, Thomas Infante had returned home. He was likely counting the money he had stolen, realizing that $400 was hardly enough to solve his long-term problems. He may have been planning his next move, or worrying about whether the police would identify him from the camera footage. He had no idea that he had left his calling card on the counter. He sat in his home completely unaware that a convoy of police vehicles was already heading his way. The false sense of security he felt was about to be shattered. When the police arrived at the residence of Thomas Infante, they approached with caution, despite the absurdity of the situation. They surrounded the building and prepared to make an arrest. When they knocked on the door, Thomas answered. He was still wearing the same clothes he had worn during the robbery less than an hour earlier. The dark hooded sweatshirt was a direct match to the one seen on the surveillance video. The evidence was piling up so fast that it was almost comical. The officers took Thomas into custody without incident. They searched his person and found a portion of the stolen cash still in his pocket. When they asked him about the robbery, Thomas reportedly confessed almost immediately. There was little point in denying it. The police held the demand note with his name and address on it. Confronted with such overwhelming proof, Thomas admitted to the crime. He explained his financial desperation and his impulsive decision to rob the bank that day. During the interrogation, Thomas revealed that he had found the pay stub in his car and used it because it was the only paper he had handy. He had torn off the top part hoping to remove his personal information, but he had failed to check the back of the bottom half. It was a mistake born of carelessness and panic. He told the investigators that he needed the money to pay bills and that he had not thought the plan through. His honesty in the aftermath painted a picture of a man who was not a villain, but simply incredibly foolish. The story of the bank robber who wrote the demand note on his own pay stub quickly leaked to the press. News outlets in Chicago and across the United States picked up the story. It became a viral sensation before the term was even widely used. People everywhere laughed at the sheer stupidity of the act. Thomas Infante became the face of dumb criminals everywhere. The headlines were merciless, mocking his lack of foresight and his accidental self-incrimination. Legal experts weighed in on the case, noting that the defense attorney for Thomas would have a very difficult job. With a confession, the stolen money in his pocket, the clothes on his back, and his name on the demand note, there was zero doubt of his guilt. The case was open and shut. Thomas was charged with bank robbery, a federal crime that carries a significant prison sentence. The gravity of his situation began to sink in as the laughter of the public faded into the reality of the judicial system. The legacy of this crime serves as a cautionary tale about the nature of desperation and the importance of thinking before acting. While it is easy to mock Thomas for his mistake, it also highlights how stress can cloud judgment. A rational person would never use their own personal documents to commit a crime. But a person under immense pressure might grab the first piece of paper they see. It is a tragic comedy of errors that resulted in a man losing his freedom over a few $100s. This case is often cited in criminal justice classes and police academies as an example of how evidence can be found in the most unlikely places. It reminds investigators to look at every detail, no matter how small. If the detective had not turned that piece of paper over, the investigation might have taken much longer. It reinforces the idea that criminals often make mistakes, and that those mistakes are the key to solving cases. The pay stub note remains one of the most famous pieces of evidence in modern robbery history. The Fifth Third Bank, where the robbery took place, continued its operations as usual. For the employees, the event became a story they would tell for years to come. The teller who received the note likely never forgot the moment she realized the robber had given her his address. It is a story that breaks the tension of a traumatic event. Instead of a terrifying memory of a violent criminal, they were left with the memory of a bumbling amateur who defeated himself. Thomas Infante faced the consequences of his actions in federal court. The judge had to weigh the severity of the crime against the ineptitude of the criminal. Bank robbery is a serious offense, regardless of how poorly it is executed. The threat of violence is implicit in the act, and the fear caused to the bank staff is real. Thomas received a sentence that reflected the law, but perhaps also acknowledged that he was not a career danger to society in the traditional sense. As time passed, the story of the Paycheck robber became a staple of internet lists and true crime trivia. It is frequently featured in compilations of the world's dumbest criminals. But beyond the humor, there is a human element to the story. It is a snapshot of a specific moment in time when the economy was crashing and people were breaking. Thomas Infante was a symptom of a larger problem, even if his reaction to it was uniquely ill-advised. We must also consider the role of technology and surveillance in this case. Even without the note, the cameras had captured clear images of Thomas. In the modern age, it is incredibly difficult to commit a crime in a public space without being recorded. The pay stub just accelerated the inevitable. It serves as a reminder that anonymity is a luxury that criminals rarely possess in the 21st century. The eyes of the city are always watching. The psychological profile of an impulsive criminal is fascinating to study. Unlike premeditated crimes, which involve planning and risk assessment, impulsive crimes are driven by immediate need. The cognitive narrowing that occurs during high-stress situations blinds the individual to obvious risks. Thomas likely had tunnel vision, focusing only on the goal of getting cash. He literally could not see the name on the back of the paper because his brain was filtering out everything except the objective. There have been other cases similar to this one over the years. Criminals have left behind wallets, cell phones, and even birth certificates. But the pay stub stands out because it was the instrument of the crime itself. It was not just dropped accidentally, it was handed over voluntarily. This distinction places Thomas Infante in a league of his own. He utilized the very evidence of his identity to facilitate the theft of the money. The impact on his family and friends must have been devastating. To see a loved one arrested is hard enough, but to see them become a national punchline adds a layer of humiliation. We often forget that the people in these stories have lives outside of their worst moments. Thomas was a neighbor, a worker, and a member of the community. One bad decision defined his entire public persona. It is a harsh penalty for a moment of foolishness. In the annals of true crime, we are usually drawn to the mysterious and the macabre. We want to know who Jack the Ripper was, or where Jimmy Hoffa is buried. But stories like this one provide a necessary counterpoint. They ground us in the reality that crime is often messy, stupid, and banal. Not every criminal is a genius, and not every case is a puzzle. Sometimes the answer is written right there in black and white. As we reflect on the story of the bank robber who wrote the note on his own paycheck, we are left with a mix of amusement and pity. It is a story that could only happen in real life, because a fiction writer would be accused of being unrealistic. It challenges our perceptions of criminality. We expect danger, and we get incompetence. We expect a chase, and we get a knock on the door. It is the ultimate anticlimax. So the next time you hear about a bank robbery, remember Thomas Infante. Remember the man who was so eager to solve his financial problems that he forgot to protect his own identity. His story serves as a permanent reminder that crime does not pay, especially when you sign your name to the crime scene. It is a legacy that will likely endure as long as people find humor in the misfortunes of those who break the law. Ultimately, the mystery here is not who did it, but how someone could be so oblivious. The human mind is capable of incredible feats of logic and creativity, but it is also capable of profound lapses in judgment. The case of the paycheck robber is a monument to that fallibility. It stands as a quirky footnote in the history of American crime, a story that will be told and retold with a shake of the head and a smile.